I'm looking over here at some statistics, and one of the measurements that we have is somewhere between and we're talking minimum here, but a brand with a consistent story and their products or services are valued 10 to 20% higher on average than a product that is not consistent and has a brand and a story that.
Welcome to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand with Nicholas Kuhner. All right. Hello, everyone. Meet Timothy Kalinowski, president of Law, a great team of brand storytellers. Tim is a seasoned brand strategist and storyteller, helping brands build meaningful connections with their audiences through purpose-driven narratives that engage and inspire. The team at Law has led impactful campaigns across industries, including tech, e-commerce, and manufacturing, crafting unique approaches to brand storytelling. Not just a storyteller, Tim is focused on ROI and has delivered campaigns for brands such as Kohler, Starbucks, and Mercury Marine, among others. So, Tim, welcome.
Hi, Nicholas. It's great to be here. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing good. I read on one of the reviews that you are very funny as a guest, so I'm hoping that you don't disappoint in this one. No pressure.
I would have loved to have been a stand-up comic. I don't think I'm built for that, though.
Yeah, so I mean, they come in all shapes and sizes, but this is not supposed to be a stand-up routine, so both of us are going to disappoint our listeners, I guess, if they're coming here for a fun show. They're here to learn about digital marketing, entrepreneurship, and brands. Law, we're going to go into a little bit about the background of Law a little bit later, but you are all about brand and storytelling. Let's just go to the basics. A lot of people have heard of brands, but what on earth is brand storytelling?
Well, we can call it brand storytelling or storytelling, but really it is the quintessential building block of any real marketing campaign. And the way that we look at it, in fact, if you go to the homepage of our website, the first thing we say is every story has a hero. It is your customer. And I think that's one of the most important things for people to realize. I've done this for a long time. I worked at large corporations. I've worked at, agencies of all shapes and sizes before starting Law. And so often it's really easy for people to focus on, their list of features and benefits and what the product or service can do and not how it impacts the customer. So the first thing that we usually do is try and break that down for people. And that's the part that's magic, is true storytelling is understanding how your customers or your potential customers are using your product or service.
Well, that's the difference between a brand and just a product. I mean, it's the storytelling. In my class, I gave an assignment to our students, and we were doing a blind taste test between Coca-Cola Zero and Pepsi Max. And I took them through that video of the giant, how could one put it, snafu that Coca-Cola did by creating Coca-Cola New Coke, and dropping their regular cola. Maybe let's talk a little bit about why does a business need a brand story? Let's go into not the fun side. So we're not going to talk about brand stories and coming up with things like that. But why is it so important for a company to have a brand story versus just focusing on the things that you mentioned, the specifications, the size, how cheap it is?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I usually like to equate this. I look at things like a company's motto sometimes, or, what is the thing that everybody can rally around? So when we talk about what a company's true story is, that it becomes the foundation of everything they do, whether it's advertising, social media, PR. I can relate it all the way down to SEO and how Google looks at your site. If you have a clear narrative, if you know who you are, and, there's I wish we had a visual example here, but it's all about patterns. We look at storytelling and branding a lot of times as patterns and creating, right? You've heard the story, a logo is not a brand kind of a thing. When you talk about those foundational, like what a brand's story is before we talk about all the external, magic of getting customers involved. If you know who you are, all of your customers, most importantly, all of your employees, all of your suppliers, everybody knows who you are. And you're all going in the same direction, pulling for the right things, the things that are going to move the needle.
How is this going to add value to business? Why I'm asking this is that the brand story side is good, but I want you to explain how this is going to add value to businesses? Because I think a lot of people think a lot of what you do is just, and what we used to say in the olden days, tits and balloons. It was basically putting sprinkles on things. What value is this going to give to a business? Why is a company like Law actually around? Can't somebody just come up with this in a weekend on a retreat and not use you?
It usually doesn't work well for them. There's a few ways to look at it. So if you want to talk about ROI, and I think there's two parts to it. One is internally, the amount of effort and time that you spend to train people and get everybody working together, whether it's your agency, whether it's internal employees, there's an enormous amount of money that a company spends to get those things right. And if you don't have that foundational story, you're going to continue to miss, and you're going to continue to spend and waste money. So the first part of it is, how do you become more efficient? Because now you have something that springboards everything else you do. And that's why I brought up things like advertising, social media, SEO, because if your foundation is right, you will save time and money across all of the outgoing media. Now, when you talk about, the ROI for a customer engagement with a brand story, well, you get to things like customers are 22 times more likely to trust and buy from a brand than if they're just interacting with a brand or just shopping based on price. Brands equate, and you brought up Pepsi and Coke, and Coke has a market value significantly higher than Pepsi. And even though they've had some flubs along the way, they've been consistent with who they are, what their story is, even their core logo since the inception. There's been almost no changes. And if you look at the Pepsi logo, they've made dozens and dozens of changes along the way, and their market valuation is significantly less. The brand value is significantly less than Coke's. And so you can start to look at other brands, whether it's Starbucks or brands that people know, Audi or Ferrari, or pick car brands or whoever. Those stories, those narratives add enormous value to a brand's bottom line.
You mentioned some of the cool brands, Ferrari, Coca-Cola, companies like that. So the brand stories for those are, come on, those are super fun, super easy, and people naturally will aspire to those kind of brands. So creating a story around that is cool. How do you take brands that aren't as cool and sexy and give them a brand story? Do those kind of brands need a brand story as well?
Absolutely. In fact, I would argue it's more important for the smaller the company. It is more important to be more focused on how you're executing things, because, every dollar matters. And I appreciate, I am not a $100 million a year business, So for us, every time that we're engaging with something, every time that we're promoting something, every minute that we spend matters. And every dollar we spend matters. So if you're a startup company and you want to grow and you're trying to figure this out, the best thing you can do is to find efficiencies with how you communicate with people. And having that story is where you start to find those efficiencies.
I think one aspect that you've missed out that I really love, and you do talk about it in terms of ROI, but let's have a look at the blind taste testing that I was just talking about. There is, for example, if you go to Costco and you get their no-name brand potato chips versus Doritos, the price of Doritos would be higher, obviously, than the store brand. And what the brand story does is it's helping increase the brand values. So that percentage extra that you're going to be paying for Doritos versus the no-name brand, even though they might taste exactly the same, but you'd rather take Doritos to a friend's party than an unbranded packet because it says all sorts of things about you.
Yeah. So, I'm looking over here at some statistics, and, one of the measurements that we have is somewhere between, and we're talking minimum here, but a brand with a consistent story and their products or services are valued 10 to 20% higher on average than a product that is not consistent and has a brand and a story that they, promote and talk about in a way that people understand. That's where those patterns come in really. I don't know if you've ever seen this, and this is where I wish I had a visual example, but there was a psychology test that was done where they took words in your native language and they started pulling letters out of a sentence. Your mind will still start to put that sentence together, and you've probably seen this, right? And that is the value of your brand story and your brand patterns. People will know who you are, even if they only get little bits of it. But if you're not consistent with this, if you don't have a good story, they can't do that. And they're certainly not going to spend more on a product that they don't trust or that they don't understand or that they can't immediately know that it's theirs. I mean, in the US, Starbucks versus your local gas station here, somebody will stop to get their petrol in the morning and they might pay $2 for a cup of coffee there. And it's okay, but it's not great. And it's kind of an off brand. But you could go down the street to Starbucks and you might spend $4 or $5 for a cup of coffee. So in some situations, you're buying 2, 3, 4 times as much in terms of value to your brand, even though the product probably doesn't cost that much more to make. We see it all the time in clothing. Even when we talked about cars before, there are car brands that are very similar to each other, even made by the same company. And there's a lot of quality and engineering between the two of them. But of course, the product with the better brand story or the one that seems more premium is the one that gets more value.
Yeah. My last point on this aspect is just going to be, again, the value of brand and brand stories in industrial and B2B companies. A strong brand can typically give you between a 2.5% price difference over unbranded or less well-branded businesses. And when you're in those very tight margin businesses, that 2.5% can make a huge difference. Now, we've been banging on a little bit about brand story. Let's talk a little bit about law and some of the other services that you've got. This, obviously, you're a traditional brand agency, obviously, but maybe talk through some of the services that you offer and how you take brand from an idea or help companies who've got an existing business but want to turn it into a brand. What is the process that you typically could take them through, and how do your services fit into that?
Well, it's a great question. A lot of times that's where things start for us. I mean, it's not the only place, but for instance, we had a distillery that was starting almost 10 years ago now, and they've actually gotten quite a bit of recognition within the US and even a bit abroad. But the first thing that we wanted to do with them was understand who they were, what they were trying to achieve, who the customers were. And sometimes we have to help somebody do that. We'll help define personas for who those customers are, as well as a persona for what the brand needs to feel, sound, kind of taste like. What is that emotional connection that the brand wants to give off? And then after that, we can start to put other services together for you. For instance, we will do all of the discovery and kind of the strategy around it. But then it comes time, and this is really where the company has evolved. When we first started, it was, what is your brand? What is your story? How do we help you tell your story? It very quickly became, well, how can we make your story for you? So we've added a production facility and a production company as part of Laura Services. So we do all photography, all video editing, we can produce podcasts, radio, TV, all of that. And then it became, well, how do you then promote it online? So we have media services where we're, helping people plan and buy media packages so that they're promoting properly. Social media experts that are helping to post things online. You can see where see where it's going. Oh, you need a website? You have an e-commerce business? Sure, we can build you a website. What does your SEO look like? And we weave very deeply all of the storytelling and all of that kind of consistency and brand narrative into it. And it doesn't matter whether it's a large B2C company or a B2B company. In fact, we're working with one now. We started a few months ago. They came to us and said, we don't know who we are. Can you tell us or help us shape our brand narrative? And what was really interesting was that process, the discovery of meeting with their customers, meeting with all of the stakeholders internally. And when I say stakeholders, I'm talking about people on the factory floor to the C-suite executives. Like, I want to know what everybody thinks about the company. And then we frame that for them. And what's happened a lot of times, what'll happen is we'll come in and they'll go, wow, now we see how this affects our culture. We can see this as a rallying point for all of our customers, all of our employees. And now we're starting to build something special, right? So now we're at the point of redoing their website for them. And so we've redone all of that copywriting and really the nitty gritty of what does it look like when that comes to life? And we've got ads running and all of those things happen for us. And we're really excited about that for our customers because it starts to make a huge difference in their overall, not just their ROI, but their growth and the way their customers see them and the way their employees see themselves and the excitement around the brand. And that's when I get really excited, is when I can see the excitement, not just with the C-suite guys, but the overall employee base and the customers that are calling going, wow, we didn't even know you existed, but you guys are great. You were a secret that I don't know why was kept from us. And I see that a lot, especially with small businesses where they just aren't getting the recognition they deserve. There's a lot of small businesses with very smart, very passionate people that don't tell their own story well, and they just never get noticed and fizzle out.
That being able to extract stories out of people is obviously one of the biggest challenges. And a lot of people don't really think they've got anything useful to say. But sometimes even the small thing that you think is just a throwaway part of your business could be that big thing that differentiates you in the market. And it's all about differentiation. Now, I used to run Interbrand in Africa, and I've worked on, really interesting big brand projects and aspects like that. A big element that we used to work on was brand valuations. Now, obviously, you are more on the creative side of it, but maybe talk about, you mentioned earlier that brands that have consistency have a multiple effect on sales. So if you look at the brand tracking on the NASDAQ, brands have outpaced the NASDAQ for the last 20, 30 years, which is quite amazing. So the value is definitely there by investing in your brand early on or making adjustments to your brand is important. What if somebody is going through a process now where they don't know if they've got a brand or they'd like to turn their product into a brand? What are the next steps if they wanted to come? Who is the ideal client to come to Tim and Law?
This is where the comedian in me wants to hold back. Somebody with a checkbook is usually a good idea.
I want somebody with a crypto wallet, not a checkbook.
Yeah, even better, for sure. But, joking aside, I think it's somebody that's ready, because the few times that I run into a company that it doesn't work, almost always the situation is that they're just not ready. They have an impression or an opinion of who they are, and they haven't grown or gone anywhere, but they aren't willing and ready to change and to kind of take that input from outside of the company or from around them, right? And that's usually where people get into trouble. And that's why, like I said on the homepage, it's every story has a hero and it is not you. Then that's where most companies get into trouble.
I typically, when looking at folks who want to improve their brand, are going to be looking at things like, are you going to be creating the brand from scratch? So are people coming to you with new brand ideas? Are they coming to you to update their brand? And you mentioned Pepsi slightly earlier. Maybe talk to me through one or two of the processes of thinking you go through when somebody's got an existing business that is just, they know they should be doing so much better, but the brand is 90s or early 2000s.
Yeah. Well, I think what happens a lot of times is people think they have a brand. I may run into a company like Starbucks who has an incredible brand. I'm not there to change their brand. They're bringing me in to help them tell a micro story of something that's going on. Let's be honest about that. But then there's other companies where we are shaping their future and we embrace that. I almost get more excited sometimes about some of the smaller business or startup businesses. I love to create a brand whole cloth. I think that's fun. We've done that. And that is, of course, exciting and everybody wants to do that. But sometimes the bigger challenge, of course, is a brand that comes in that's limping along. They've got a good product or a good service, and they're looking to make a move. They want that growth and they're hungry for it. And so we embrace that completely, because those people, that's where magic starts to happen, because they stop holding on to things that they've been holding on to for a long time. And yeah, maybe it's the 90s, but it's not always about how a brand has aged. It's how a brand connects, right? 80% of customers are willing to pay more or do more if it's a brand that they trust. And at the end of the day, I don't care if it's Amazon or who it is about trust. And if people can trust you and understand who you are, you will go very, very far.
The last thing I want to touch on is I saw you worked at a company called Kohler, and I just loved the place where it is, Sheboygan in Wisconsin. And I remember watching Groundhog Day and thought that name was hilarious. What is it like working in Sheboygan?
Well, so even though Kohler is in Sheboygan, it's also actually located in the village of Kohler, which was a garden community that was designed by the Olmsted brothers, who were the architects of Central Park in New York City. So it is a very beautiful, serene, almost too perfect in terms of a community. Somehow they figured out how to put, beautiful homes and a nice shopping center and all of the creature comforts that you would need in a community, along with a gigantic factory that's been there for 150, 170 years. It's almost like a Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory kind of a thing. It's almost surreal. Like you can't believe that you're there. There's golf courses that have hosted major championships. They had a Ryder Cup a couple of years ago. If you're a golf fan, you've got world-class spa. I mean, it is a surreal experience to work there. And they've done things very, very well. They believe in a very high standard of quality to everything that they do. So for a brand guy and a person who's looking to be in part of a whole bunch of brands, they have 52 different brands. and I got to work on all of them, and the expectations of what you're doing is super high. So yeah, sign me up all of the time when you can work on great brands with great products with a global reach. It's a fun and exciting thing.
Well, I had a look at your bit of your background, and you didn't move around terribly much. You've been quite a loyal guy in the businesses, and that shows that with a company like Kohler, that 54 brands, that's enough to keep anyone busy, and you move through the ranks. So if anyone really wants to know somebody who has worked through the ranks of, big multinational and really understands brand and getting things to market, Timothy is the chap to speak to, President of Law. Timothy, thank you so much for joining us today. And where can folks get in touch with you if they'd like to know more about your great team of brand storytellers?
Sure. Well, of course, start at our website, loretold.com. That is, the best place. And of course, you can look me up on LinkedIn. It's put that link in the description. But yeah, because of course, the LinkedIn links are far too long to try and repeat here. But yeah, loretold.com and LinkedIn are always the best place to get me. And I'll throw this out. I'll always offer to meet with somebody if they have questions and they're trying to figure out what might be next for them. I'll always give somebody an hour of my time. And my Calendly is just calendly.com/Tim Kalinowski. And I'd invite somebody to schedule a meeting with me. I'll give them an hour and I'll give them an honest, diagnosis of what's going on and where they might go next.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that offer. And Tim, great chatting to you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate being here.
I really do appreciate your comments. So why not go and watch this live on YouTube, or go to my website, kuhne.no. That's KUHNE.no for more information.